Before there were cities, before there were words, before there was anyone to ask the question, where did we come from? There was a planet. A dead, burning, poisonous rock spinning alone in the dark. For most of its history, Earth had no interest in producing us. It did not know we were coming. And yet across 4.5 billion years, through fire, ice, poison, and catastrophe, something kept happening here that has never, as far as we know, happened anywhere else in the universe. Life kept finding a way to continue. This is the story of everything that happened before us, before Homo sapiens ever existed. It is the story of the ancestors, the monsters, the disasters, and the sheer, staggering luck that had to occur for you to be watching this right now. $4.54 billion years ago, Earth formed, not gently but violently, out of colliding rubble left over from the birth of the sun. There was no blue sky, no ocean, no green anywhere. The surface was largely molten rock. The atmosphere was a toxic mix of carbon dioxide, methane, and water vapor, with none of the oxygen we breathe today. And then catastrophe, even by the standards of a planet that was already a catastrophe. Roughly 4.5 billion years ago, most planetary scientists believe a Mars-sized body, nicknamed Theia, slammed into the young Earth. The collision was so violent it very likely formed the moon from the debris. This remains the leading scientific hypothesis for the moon's origin, not proven beyond doubt, but supported by lunar rock composition brought back by the Apollo missions. For hundreds of millions of years, Earth was bombarded relentlessly by a period geologists call the Late Heavy Bombardment. Slowly as the planet cooled, water vapor condensed. Rain fell, perhaps for thousands of years without stopping, and the first oceans began to pool across the surface. There was no life, not a single cell, just chemistry, waiting. Then sometime between 3.8 and 3.5 billion years ago, something extraordinary happened. Nobody witnessed it. We may never know exactly how. But somewhere in the ancient oceans, possibly near hydrothermal vents on the seafloor, chemistry crossed a line into biology. The oldest direct fossil evidence comes from stromatolites, layered mineral structures built by colonies of microbes found in Western Australia, dated to roughly 3.5 billion years ago. Some chemical signatures in rocks suggest life may go back even further, to 3.7, 4.1 billion years, though this remains an active and contested area of research. These first organisms, bacteria and archaea, had no eyes, no brain, no heart, no bones. They were single cells, invisible to the naked eye. And yet, for almost 2 billion years, they were the only living things on Earth. Simple life did not just survive here. It ruled here alone for longer than complex life has existed at all. Around 2.4 billion years ago, a group of microbes, cyanobacteria, began doing something no organism had ever done before. capturing sunlight and releasing oxygen as a waste product. At first, the oceans simply absorbed it, reacting with dissolved iron to form rust that sank to the seafloor. We can still see the evidence of this today, layered in ancient rock formations called banded iron formations. But eventually, the oceans could not absorb anymore. Oxygen began flooding into the atmosphere for the first time in Earth's history, an event geologists call the Great Oxidation Event. For most of the life on Earth at the time, this was not good news. Oxygen is a highly reactive, corrosive gas. For organisms that had evolved in an oxygen-free world, it was poison. Many scientists consider this the first mass extinction in Earth's history, wiping out huge populations of anaerobic microbes that could not tolerate the new atmosphere. There is also a striking hypothesis some scientists have proposed that the sudden loss of atmospheric methane, destroyed by the new oxygen, may have collapsed the greenhouse effect and triggered one of Earth's earliest global ice ages, sometimes called a snowball Earth episode. It was a disaster for the old world, but it was also, unintentionally, the foundation for everything that came after. Because oxygen is what would eventually allow large, complex, energy-hungry organisms, animals, plants, and eventually us, to exist at all. For nearly 3 billion years, life had stayed almost entirely microscopic and simple. Then in a geological instant, about 541 million years ago, that changed forever. In a period some scientists have called the biological Big Bang, most of the major animal body plans we recognize today appeared within a span of roughly 13 to 25 million years. A blink of an eye in geological terms. Eyes evolved, legs evolved, hard shells and exoskeletons evolved, and for the first time, active predators evolved to hunt other animals. One leading scientific hypothesis, proposed by paleobiologist Andrew Parker, suggests the evolution of eyes may have kicked off an evolutionary arms race. Once one animal could see and hunt, every other animal needed defenses, speed, or better senses to survive. The exceptional fossil beds of the Burgess Shale in Canada and Chengjiang in China preserve these bizarre creatures in extraordinary detail. Animals with 5 eyes, creatures that look like nothing alive today. Most of these lineages are now extinct. Only a handful gave rise to the animal groups still living on Earth. The oceans, once quiet and simple, had suddenly become an arena. For nearly 4 billion years, dry land had remained utterly barren, exposed rock under an unfiltered sun. Then around 470 million years ago, the first plants, relatives of modern mosses, began to creep out of the water and colonize the land, based on the oldest fossil spore evidence discovered in Argentina and the Arabian Peninsula. Plants changed everything. As they spread, they began breaking down rock into soil and pumping more oxygen into the atmosphere. Not long after, arthropods, ancestors of insects and spiders, followed them out of the ocean, among the very first animals to breathe air directly. Amphibians, evolving from lobe-finned fish, would follow soon after, taking the first tentative steps of a vertebrate onto dry ground. Earth was growing a skin. By the Carboniferous period, roughly 320 million years ago, Earth's atmosphere had changed dramatically. Oxygen levels are estimated to have reached as high as 35%, compared to about 21% today. That extra oxygen may explain one of the strangest chapters in the history of life. Because insects and arthropods breathe passively through tiny tubes rather than lungs, their maximum body size is thought to be limited by how much oxygen is in the air. In this oxygen-rich world, dragonfly-like insects called Meganeura grew wingspans over 70 centimeters, and millipede relatives called Arthropleura grew longer than 2 meters, the largest land arthropod ever known to exist. Vast swampy forests of giant ferns and primitive trees called lycopsids covered huge areas of the planet. When these forests died and were buried over millions of years, the pressure and heat of geology transformed their remains into something we still burn today: coal. Much of the coal powering the Industrial Revolution, hundreds of millions of years later, came directly from this single strange chapter of Earth's history. Before the dinosaurs could rise, the planet had to be nearly wiped clean. About 252 million years ago, at the end of the Permian period, Earth suffered the most severe extinction event in its entire history, sometimes called the Great Dying. An estimated 90 to 96% of marine species and roughly 70% of land vertebrate species vanished, most likely triggered by massive volcanic eruptions in what is now Siberia. Out of that emptied world, dinosaurs first appeared around 230 to 240 million years ago, and by the beginning of the Jurassic period, roughly 200 million years ago, they had become the dominant land animals on the planet, a reign that would last more than 160 million years. For comparison, Homo sapiens has existed for roughly 300,000 years. Dinosaurs ruled the Earth for more than 500 times longer than our entire species has existed. This was not a world frozen in time. Small chicken-sized dinosaurs coexisted with massive, long-necked herbivores and apex predators like Tyrannosaurus rex. Fossil evidence from China and elsewhere shows that many dinosaurs, especially smaller predatory species, were covered in feathers, and modern birds are now classified by the overwhelming majority of paleontologists as the direct descendants of one dinosaur lineage that survived to the present day. In other words, dinosaurs never fully went extinct. Some are still outside your window right now. Quietly in the shadows of these giants, the first true mammals had also appeared. Small, nocturnal, mostly no bigger than a mouse biding their time. And then in a single day, geologically speaking, in less than a second, it ended. About 66 million years ago, an asteroid roughly 10 kilometers wide struck what is now the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico, at a site geologists called the Chicxulub crater, discovered in the late 1970s and confirmed through drilling studies decades later. The impact released energy equivalent to billions of times the atomic bombs dropped in World War II. The immediate blast triggered continent-scale wildfires and megatsunamis, but the true killer came after. Pulverized rock and soot were thrown so high into the atmosphere that sunlight was blocked for months or years, collapsing photosynthesis and, with it, entire food chains. Roughly 75% of all species on Earth went extinct, including every dinosaur species except the lineage that had already evolved into birds. It remains one of the 5 most catastrophic extinction events in the 4 billion year history of life on this planet. The age of giants was over. With the dinosaurs gone, except for the birds among us, the world lay open. Mammals, which had spent well over 100 million years staying small and cautious in the shadows of reptiles, diversified explosively in the millions of years that followed. Within tens of millions of years, mammal lineages evolved to fill niches once held by dinosaurs, giving rise eventually to elephants, whales, which descended from small hoofed land mammals that returned to the sea, horses, and, in the trees of Africa, the earliest primates. Then step by step over millions of years, Australopithecus around 4 million years ago. Homo habilis around 2.4 million years ago. Homo erectus around 1.9 million years ago, the first of our ancestors known to control fire and leave Africa. And finally, roughly 300,000 years ago, based on fossils discovered at Jebel Irhoud, Morocco, Homo sapiens. If you compress the entire 4.54 billion year history of Earth into a single 24-hour day, here is where everything you just watched would fall. Midnight, Earth forms. Around 4 a.m., the first life appears. Around 9 p.m., complex multicellular animal life begins to flourish. (10:40 p.m., the first dinosaurs appear. 11:39 p.m., the asteroid ends their reign. 11:58 p.m., the first hominins, our earliest human ancestors, appear. 23 hours, 59 minutes, and 56 seconds, Homo sapiens appears, 4 seconds before midnight. And every human civilization ever recorded, Egypt, Greece, Rome, every empire, every war, every book, this very video, happens in less than the final second of that day. This was only the beginning. In the episodes ahead, we'll go deeper into the oceans that gave birth to the first breath, the forests that built our air, and the extinctions that quietly decided who would live to become us. If you want to keep uncovering the story of this planet, one chapter at a time, subscribe and join us for what comes next.